you all for joining the PSL Demo Day. We are pleased to have Bodi Yang with us presenting work on the open source policy center tax model and new payroll tax calculator, which allows users to compute income tax offsets associated with the employer payroll portion of the payroll taxes. Bodi is a research associate at the American Enterprise Institute, and want to thank you all for joining us. If you have questions, feel free to pop in throughout or at the end, and take it away, Bodi.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Max, and thanks for the policy simulation library for having me today. This new model is called the Tax-Calculator-Payroll, which is for the purpose of payroll tax revenue estimation and projection, also the liability calculation. The basic logic of today's presentation will be the motivation. Why do we need this new model apart from what we already have? As many of you may be already familiar with tax calculator and tax data or have been the user of these two models. I will briefly present what are the new features of this new model bring us and what are the mechanisms, how do we actually model those new features. And finally, I will give a demonstration of the usage to show the users how to interact with this new model. I'll start by sharing my screen so we can have an easier look. Okay, so here are some useful informations. Maybe if you want to check the details of the code, you can go to this web link here, the GitHub handle. I will not dig into the code today, but stay at the more higher level usage interface perspective of the model. And if you have any questions, you can send me an email to ask after the presentation. So we can start by looking at this flow chart, which gives you an overview of the structure of the models. This family of tax models, which we already have, tax calculator. So tax calculator is the central component, the macro simulation model to do the tax liability calculation. And before that, we have tax data, which is to extrapolate the information from PAF data and CPS data and forward this information as a processed input data set to tax calculator to use. And apart from them, we also have the behavioral response package, which is an add-on package working with tax calculator to estimate the changes from behavioral response. This is normally associated with tax reform, come from the changes from capital gains and losses. And finally, we also have tax brain, which is an integrator to wrap up all those models together. So what is the role for this? What would be the status of this new Tax-Calc-Payroll model apart from what we are already having here? A simple answer is that there are some topics and usage which goes beyond the realm of this current modeling structure, and we need a new platform to hosting them. So from a larger picture, many different think tanks or research organizations build their tax models into an income tax part and a payroll tax part. So this first reason is for a more systematic modeling management. It will be probably easier and more clear to build the model into an income tax part and a payroll tax part. This tax called payroll will be the payroll tax part. And the second reason is probably a more direct reason. The current payroll tax policy perimeter system in tax calculator does not split between the employer side and the employee side. So two parts of the payroll tax, the FICA Social Security tax, 12.4% is not split between the employer side and employee side for 6.2% each. And also the Medicare tax is just framed as 2.9% as a total, but not split between the employer side and the employee side for 1.45%. upon each. This makes it not possible for the user to do a simulation if they have an idea, want to simulate a tax reform, for example, to raise the employer side only payroll tax rate by 1%. So it is not possible in the framework of tax calculator. However, this new tax payroll will reframe the policy perimeters and make that possible. And another thing is, furthermore, there is an offset effect associated with the employer side payroll tax change. I will actually focusing on this offset effect for the rest of the presentation, which is also the core function of this new payroll tax model. So a little bit background, what's the meaning of this payroll tax effect, payroll tax offset effect? Basically speaking, whenever the government trying to raise the payroll tax rate from the employer side, what we are expecting is that the government will collect more payroll tax revenue from the employer side. However, there's another thing which will happen at the same time is that there will be a decrease of the tax revenue from the employee side, from both the income tax revenue and from the payroll tax revenue. How does this thing happens and the mechanism behind this, and also the way we modeling this phenomenon is that we hold a basic assumption. The basic assumption is we think the total compensation remain unchanged, the total compensation from the employer to the employee. And what is this total compensation? Basically speaking, three parts, three components. First component is income and wages employer paid to the employee. Second component is payroll tax employer paid to the government. And the third part is a non-taxable benefit. We do not take the non-taxable benefit into consideration because we do not have good data to get the information for that. And also the effect from the non-taxable benefit should not be very significant to the value of the total compensation. So we are really focusing on these two parts, the income and wages and the employer side payroll tax. One step further, how do we calculate the employer side payroll tax? Two parts, the FICA security, Social Security part and the FICA Medicare part. The FICA Social Security payroll tax equals to the wage and income times the FICA Social Security tax rate, and also same as the Medicare. I think I have a typo here, so it should be the FICA Social Security tax rate. FICA Social Security tax rate times the wage. And also the Medicare part is with the Medicare tax rate times wages. So 6.2% from the Social Security part on the employer side and 1.45% from the employer side on the Medicare side. Then we can wrap up this formula to do the calculation of the new wage after the tax reform. So this new wage will equals to the baseline wage, the old wage, times this thing is more like an offset rate. The numerator is total compensation value, and the denominator is 1 plus Social Security tax rate, plus the new Social Security tax rate, and the new Medicare payroll tax rate. Then after we get this new wage and income, we can forward this to tax calculator to do the further tax liability calculation based on that. So let's go back to this chart for another review of how this thing happens. Is that whenever the government raises the payroll tax rate from the employer side, the employer will have a incentive to keep the total compensation the same. So they will cut the employee's wage, and this cutting of the employee's wage will affect the tax revenue from the employee side, both income tax revenue and the payroll tax revenue. So that is the idea of how this system works. Next step, I will jump into the usage of this function, the payroll offset function. Okay, so this is web page of the GitHub link to the model, so you can find all of the code there. I have write a couple of recipes. If it might be easier for the user to follow to see how to interact with the model. So go to this docs directory and then go to the recipes directory. You will find there are 3 recipes here, which are for the usage of the model. First recipe is for the simple usage of the tax liability calculation. There is a thing to be mentioned that this Tax-Calc-Payroll inherits software infrastructure from the tax calculator. So the usage of the tax liability calculation remain the same for these 2 models. As we can see, after we import the package, import this Tax-Calc-Payroll package, we can construct a calculator object based on 2 elements, essentially the record class element, which we will clarify which data we will be using. So either POP data or CPS data or any user customized data set can be used there. I'm pick up the POP data here. And then the other element is a policy class element where the user can indicate which reform they would like to use. Right now, I will just keep the baseline reform under the current law. So that is a construction of the calculator object. Then after indicating which year you want to do the calculation, we can run the calculator and get the result. For example, for the year 2024, the total income tax revenue is around $2.2 trillion. And the total payroll tax revenue is around $1.6 trillion. And for the usage of the multi-year projections, we can just create a for loop to go through each year's, run the calculator and print the result. So I think this looks pretty straightforward for the usage of tax liability calculation. So the next usage will be about this offset function. At here, so the employer payroll offset function, it takes the input variable of the reformed policy. Right here, I'm just using an example of raising the FICA security tax rate on the employer side from 6.2% to 7.2%, so 1% up from the year 2025. So that is a new reform and for the input variable for this new offset function. And then we will also need the information of the baseline calculator class. So the baseline calculator object and also the baseline policy class and the baseline record class. After we run this offset function, we will get the result of what will be the total tax revenue after this tax reform. So for the year 2025, the total tax revenue we can get after the reform and after we take in consideration of this offset will be $4 trillion plus $23 billion. Yeah, around this number. Also, for the multi-year usage, this chart gives you a basic idea of what the projection will look like for the next 10 years, from the year 2024 to the year 2033. As we can see from here, the reform start at the year 2025. So the year 2024, there is no revenue change from the baseline policy revenue and the reformed policy revenue. Every change starts from the year 2025. And we can see the overall effect from the reform is that we can bring a total revenue of around $48.8 trillion in total. That again, that is a consideration after the reform and also by taking consideration of the offset effect, which is around $717 billion more than the baseline policy. So this is how many more revenue this reform can bring you. Another thing to be noticed is that there is $350 billion difference from the reformed policy by considering the offset effect and the reformed policy not considering the offset effect. So this 350 is a numerical effect from this offset function. So this is for the usage of this offset function. One more thing I want to show you is another comparison between two reforms. The reform to the reform implemented upon the employer side and the reform implemented upon the employee side. So both raise 1% tax rate on the FICA Social Security from the year 2025. By looking at the result, we can see under the first reform, so raise the FICA Social Security tax rate 1% up from the employer side, we can get a total revenue around $48.8 trillion revenue. And by implementing the reform, raising 1% FICA Security tax rate from the employee side, we can get around $49.2 trillion revenue. So the second reform raised more revenue compared with first reform. Another thing is the difference between the first reform and the second reform is a $350 billion difference. That is also similar to the last recipe we were talking about. But so this difference reflect by considering the offset effect or not. So this is a little bit analysis about that. Yeah, so I think this will wrap up the usage of this function. I will nextly probably just walk through this model a little bit more to give you an idea of where to find those most important functions. So this is the main page of this Tax-Calc-Payroll model. All of the important functions are in this Tax-Calc-Payroll directory, where you can find the calcfunctions.py is where we host the payroll tax liability calculation functions with documentation like this. And then another script, which is also important, is payroll offset.py, where we host the offset function. Here is a little bit more documentation of the methodologies we use, and also the link to the like the paper which actually support these mechanisms of the offset effect. If you want to learn more details, you can trace back to this GCT paper there, which have more evidence about why this offset effect, for example, why we take the assumption of the total compensation remain unchanged before and after the offset. Yeah, so apart from that, other script like calculator.py, then policy.py, records.py are more like the software infrastructure where we can construct those different objects. So that would be the overview of the model. And I'm also in progress of creating this documentation page right here. There is more documentation of the input variables for the model, output variables for the model. So these are the same system as which the tax calculator is adopting. And also you can find the recipes from there. Yeah. So I think that would be everything about the model. A little bit more details about the schedule. So for this model, 90% of the work I think has already been completed. The rest of the time will be do more polish and refinement work to make it better. For example, making more documentations. And another important thing is to build the connection between Tax-Calc-Payroll with other tax models like Tax-Calculator. So to make these two models more integrated and make it possible to interact with each other. so my expectation is to have this first release probably in the coming weeks. Yeah. I think that will conclude my presentation of today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bodi. This was really interesting work. And I think represents the modularity and the availability of new capabilities that open source software development and the tax calculator model that's really pioneered this space opens up. So thank you for the presentation. And I have some questions myself, but I'm curious if folks in the audience also have questions they'd like to ask.
I have one question. Thank you, Bodi, for the presentation. It's very helpful for our future work in like revising and improving our module for payroll tax. I have one question about when you calculate the total compensation, how do you treat the self-employment income?
So the self-employment income is not considered for this offset effect because it's a pure like we will consider it actually more on the employee side. So we will categorize the SECA tax from the employee side. So that will actually not go into this circle of the offset effect. So that's why I didn't include it there.
Okay.
Yeah, but this item is definitely included in the total tax liability calculation, just under a different title, I would say.
And just to add a little bit more detail to that, the calculation of SECA itself already in effect includes what's mechanically the offset, because half of the SECA paid is deductible against taxable income. And that deduction is in effect equivalent treatment to this employer side payroll tax offset. It gets you roughly to the same place.
Yeah, so in the current tax calculator, it's already have like that parameter of 93.75%, right? So that's
the way it works, you have Schedule SE and you include a 92.35% of your profits into the SECA base, calculate your SECA, then take half of that, and that's deductible against income tax liability, and that you roughly get to the same place as if you were to do this offset effect. I mean, the main purpose of adding this offset was to get closer to what the Joint Committee and everyone else would find for an employer side payroll tax change.
So I just did a rough calculation. Your size of the offset effects is like 33%.
It depends on the policy. The offset is going to be smaller for Social Security than it is for Medicare because the base is different. But Bodi ran a revenue estimate for that's equivalent to what the CBO did in their options guide, and we were pretty close to what they were finding, which I think their revenue estimate was a 0.5 percentage point on the employee side and a 0.5 percentage point on the employer side.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I have. Thank you.
I guess on a related note, I was curious, Bodi, if you've seen, is this in alignment with, for example, how TPC and maybe Tax Foundation do this, or?
I didn't find the documentation of the model from like a tax policy center so far. So yeah, I'm actually not sure if they actually have like framework to measure the offset effect or not. But as Kyle have said, the Congressional Budget Office definitely taking consideration of this offset effect, and our result is in line with CBO's result.
Great.
Yeah, it aligns with two basic assumptions. One is that taxpayers are paid their marginal productivity of labor, whatever that the share is between employer side payroll tax, fringe benefits, and wages. And then second, which I think is just as important, is the assumption that on a conventional basis that national income is held fixed. If you were to, our model previously, before this offset was put in place, violated that second assumption because it allowed nominal compensation to rise, which implies that prices were rising and national income was changing. And so this makes it this is in line with the fixed national income assumption.
So that's like in line with your definition of expanded income. So you put all those employer side payroll to your expanded income, right?
Yes, expanded income is AGI plus adjustments. So going from AGI to gross income plus employer side payroll taxes.
Yeah, we tax foundation don't have that. We just use AGI to distribute the income. So that's why we want to improve.
I was curious also if there are other similar modules that you're looking to expand the tax calculator suite to include.
I see. So another thing which I have discussed with Kyle is that probably in the future we have the plan to develop an excess tax model, and this excess tax model also have a similar offset like effect with income tax part and the payroll tax part from the capital and the labor income, this perspective. And another probably also like go back to the reason why we developed this Tax-Calc-Payroll is that we may find it easier to do the analysis from the income tax part and the payroll tax part separately when we deal with offset effect from the excess tax. Yeah, so that is probably another tentative future development plan.
Great. And in terms of other employer side taxes, for example, state level payroll tax, is that on the horizon for you all right now? Or
we haven't discussed it. Right now we're just focused on federal, but yeah, the effect would be the same. A state level employer side payroll tax would create a wedge between the amount the employer pays and the amount the employee receives, and would trickle through and impact income tax and employee side payroll tax revenue.
Wonderful. Any other questions before we wrap up today? Well, I want to thank you again, Bodi, and also Kyle for contributing your expertise on this call. Again, we're the PSL Demo Day. You can follow along at pslmodels.org for more demo days like these and other educational opportunities around open source policy modeling. So thank you all for tuning in. See you next time.